The CCCR, or Centre for Creative and Cultural Research, investigates the ancient, innovative relationship between social culture and creative production. Based in the Faculty of Arts and Design at the University of Canberra, we generate scholarship and artwork in a wide array of humanities, social science, applied and creative disciplines. You are listening to a fresh presentation from the CCCR's Culture and Creativity Seminar Series. The presentation was delivered with slides. To view those slides, or to learn more about the Centre's work, please follow the links in the program notes. This podcast was recorded on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples.
Hi everybody, my name is Paul McGee. I'm the Director of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research here at the University of Canberra. We are on unceded Ngunnawal land and we pay our respects to elders past and present and to all First Nations people in attendance today. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Glen. Glen Fuller is Professor of Communication and Media. He's published across a range of topics and fields, including cultural studies. And actually, we first met in the context of cultural studies in the Cultural Studies Association.
It was here
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Back in the past, where we used to do conference calls together because Zoom had not been invented. So Glen is Professor of Communications and Media. He's published across a range of topics and fields, including cultural studies, communication and media studies, and gender studies. Please join me in welcoming him here today.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. Well, this is exciting. I'm excited. Hopefully you're excited too. I thought this was a great opportunity to give a theory paper. I've been dying to give a theory paper at UC since I started in 2011. Haven't really had an opportunity to, so I thought, why not? Let's just go for it. Part of why I wanted to be an academic was because of the kind of adventure of your mind, that kind of intellectual journey you go on. And I really, really believe in that. As a child growing up in the suburbs of Australia, you don't encounter it really by accident, do you really? You have to seek it out. And so I had some good contact points in my own education. Yeah, and so I thought, why not? Let's do a theory paper for the CCCR. I also thought, as a bit of an introduction, I'd talk about where I'm up to with my current actual research projects that I'm working on. So this was just published last week, I think it was, via Continuum, which is, arguably Australia's leading media and cultural studies journal. We did a special issue, Tal Harper, Ian Buchanan and I, on EVs and the energy transition from a kind of cultural studies perspective. This is the introduction and it goes to town critically engaging with Scott Morrison's comment from 2019 about ending your weekend when he was talking about EVs and the energy transition. And we locate this current moment, this current kind of cultural and historical moment in the context of the 2025 Australian federal election. So really bringing it up to date and thinking through this as a moment of transformation. And so we draw on Ian's work on assemblage theory, and we use it to conceptualize EVs, not just as technologies, but as part of a broader constellation of material, social and discursive elements characterized by different stratifications. And so, we think about it in terms of the emergence of new subjectivities. And so you may have seen this as a meme, the solar dad meme. Did anyone see that on their social media channels? Anyway, there's a dad who's just got solar power at his house and he's super smug and very excited about it. And so we use that to think about how different kinds of energy literacies start to circulate, right? So that's in the introduction. You can look at that later if you're interested in that sort of stuff. These are my two projects that I hope to publish soon. The first one's, I'm laughing because I've been working on it for about 18 months, but we think through the road test. So I did my PhD on enthusiast cultures and car cultures in particular, and I'm thinking about EVs. This moment of transition and transformation as being a process of re-automobilization. So if you've ever looked at mobility studies, the work of John Arry, who I met in Sweden many years ago, it's kind of central there. Yeah, and looking at road tests. So anyway, I could talk about that, but I won't too much. The next one is some work I'm doing around micro-celebrity. So I've published on kind of celebrity over the years and thinking through the transformation, the emergence of different kinds of celebrity with social media. And so there's been a fantastic project by a fellow by the name of Matt Armstrong, who's actually very popular on YouTube. So when he publishes a new video on YouTube, it hits the kind of top 10 videos on YouTube, which is amazing for someone who rebuilds kind of supercars in Britain. That's his shtick. He recently attempted to rebuild a Lamborghini, 2025 Lamborghini hybrid it was. And he sets up his own kind of enthusiast identity in opposition to the hybrid technology, which is fascinating for me, very interesting, because I often think about enthusiasm being characterized by people's challenges that they kind of mobilize around. And this was a challenge he could not conquer. So failed enthusiasm, maybe. No, he wouldn't like that. Anyway, they're the projects I'm working on at the moment, but that's not what I'm talking about today. Today, I am talking about cosmic Deleuze. For those who don't know, the work of Gille Deleuze represents a substantial body of work, 30 books, 5 co-authored volumes, numerous essays, and now you can actually access 16 years worth of lectures he gave at Paris 8. That's available online. So there are many different ways of engaging with Deleuze and Guattari's philosophy, and I'm just going to list them, right? So this is the 8 ways. I've been working on this for 20 years, basically a lot of this stuff for 20 years. And there's a lot of different ways you can approach the work of Deleuze and Guattari. So firstly, continental philosophy and post-structuralism, where people concern themselves with metaphysics, ethics, and a critique of identity and representation. Secondly, political theory and radical politics. So here I'm thinking of the work of Tony Negri and others, Brian Masumi, more recently, his work on anti-fascism, new forms of resistance, affective politics, and the critique of neoliberalism. So third, cultural studies and media theory, where I largely sit, along with other people like Steve Chavarro and others, media ecologies, digital culture, post-cinematic affect. Fourth, schizoanalysis and psychoanalysis. So the work of Felix Guattari, my friend Ian's work, Ian Buchanan, subjectivity, unconscious therapy, and kind of collective assemblages. Fifth, art and aesthetics. So I'm most familiar with the work of Ronald Bogue, creative processes, affect, the role of art in transformation. Six, science and systems theory from Manuel Delander, a kind of materialist ontology is his key focus there, nonlinear systems and synthetic philosophy. Seventh and second last, feminist and queer theory, Rosie Bradotti, Liz Gross and others, gender, embodiment, post-humanism and nomadic subjectivity. Last, education and pedagogy, largely riffing off some comments that Deleuze made, but it's expanded radically, looking at learning as becoming and kind of curriculum assemblages. So these schools often overlap, and many thinkers draw on multiple strands. However, they do represent kind of distinct sets of different concerns and methodologies, ranging from metaphysics, kind of speculative work, to practical political engagement, from artistic experimentation to educational reform. Each has its own disciplinary compositions and normative scholarly logics. So the impetus for this presentation is to think through, is there a version of Deleuze's philosophy that can serve as a point of engagement or traction that is developed for non-philosophers outside of traditional educational contexts, so outside of those 8 strands. So that's largely how I engaged with Deleuze's work. I encountered it as an undergraduate, almost in passing. It was in a kind of collective body, edited collection from modernism to postmodernism. I can't remember who the person who edited it was, but it was just a reading in passing, and then I thought, oh, this seems interesting. I went to the library and I kind of investigated it. There was no teaching involved. I went on a kind of journey of self-discovery to engage with it. Of course, as an Australian male growing up in the suburbs, I was fascinated by the concept of the war machine, and I could use my imagination to relate it back to Mad Max, was how my first connection to thinking through Deleuze in a very practical way. So I've been troubled, as everyone has, by the recent dismantling of the infrastructure around kind of humanities scholarship around the world. And I think we'll get to a point where there will be no formal introduction to some of these ideas in the future. It'll be kind of people on their own out kind of investigating and thinking these things through. And secondly, it'll be people who are going to be supported by Gen AI in their kind of adventures, right? They'll be asking AI for summaries. They won't have the patience to read 30 books, to take 20 years to think it through. they'll want to engage with it now and think about it now. So in that context, for me, I'm thinking about 3 lines of argumentation that are happening at once. And that's actually a joke. That's a Deleuzian joke, thinking about different temporalities all overlapping at once. But I'm actually only going to make one today. So even though there's 3 arguments, I'm only actually making one. So the rest are in a kind of virtual suspension. And that's the middle one. The middle one I'm going to make today. The middle one, I'm going to aim to explicate a cosmic Deleuze. This is my branding, right? For people with no formal engagement in kind of humanities scholarship, this is how I think they'll be encouraged to engage with it, a cosmic Deleuze, a cosmic perspective. And to do so, I'm going to work on kind of describing, I guess, the concept of the 4th person singular from Deleuze's work. And my key, I've got 2 examples, one which is to kind of illustrate the concept, and it's of Dr. Manhattan, for those familiar, the blue superhuman from Alan Moore's The Watchmen. And then I'm going to turn to what is hopefully the most approachable version of a singular multiplicity that I could think of, which is the boiling point of water, and use that to think through assemblage theory and show how the 4th person singular is a useful point of traction. Whether or not it's kind of successful at this stage, I'm not sure. But if you bear with me, have patience, we can make it through. And then I'm going to shift gears a little bit at the very end to think through what away from this notion of the cosmic Deleuze to what I would call a minimal Deleuze. So for people who are familiar with Deleuzian scholarship, this is a minimalistic version of Deleuze that I'll be expanding upon. All right. So a good starting point for me is the kind of most effective place for my reckoning, having read basically all of Deleuze's work, is the period of time just before he submits his doctoral theses. So in the late 1960s, the body of work he turns into his major and minor theses, which is the system in France, were published as Difference and Repetition and The Logic of Sense. And so he's giving a paper talking about his method of dramatization in 1967 to what was called the Reunion of the French Society of Philosophy. And in the room were 14 people, 13 philosophers and Deleuze, and he's asked a series of questions, and this is answers. This is one of his answers, right? This is 2 years prior to him submitting his doctoral thesis work. It seems to me we have the means to penetrate the sub-representational to reach all the way to the roots of spatio-temporal dynamisms and all the way to the ideas actualized in them, the elements and the ideal events, the differential relations, I've added the word differential, that's what he's talking about, and singularities are perfectly determinable. And so I want to riff off that idea that we can perfectly determine singularities. And for that, he means we can see what they are in advance, but we don't know how they're going to be actualized. So what do I mean by that? All right, and here I'm going to shift gears, talk about the 4th person singular. So in The Logic of Sense, he literally equates, this is as close as you can get to an actual statement from Deleuze on this, singularities are the true transcendental events, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti calls them the 4th person singular. So the concept of the 4th person singular comes from the French version of Ferlinghetti's novel called Her. So in France, it was actually published as the 4th person singular. That was the name of it. I can't pronounce it in French. Yeah, and so I use it to think through what is the perspective of these transcendental events. If we're going to approach Deleuze's philosophy, we need to have a way of grasping this, right? There's lots of ways to approach it once you start to get traction. But if you look at it in its kind of totality without trying to be totalizing, then this is a good way to start engaging with it. Not many other Deleuzian scholars have actually taken this as the thing that they want to engage with in Deleuze's work. There's been one journal article from Geoff Bradley in the Journal of Deleuze Studies, The Eyes of the 4th Person Singular, where Bradley basically offers the most sustained and explicit engagement with a concept. He traces its poetic origin in Ferlinghetti's novel and its philosophical uptake in Deleuze's Logic of Sense. So I want you to understand the 4th person singular as a perspective in the literal sense of referring to singular points. That's why I'm talking about it. And so singular points, Deleuze draws from mathematical representations. He borrows the term from mathematics, especially differential calculus. In this context, a singularity is a point where a function behaves in a non-regular way, like the cusp or a bifurcation. He uses this to describe how change and difference emerge in systems. In the logic of sense, Deleuze connects singularities to events. An event is not just something that happens, but a pure happening, a sense that hovers over the actual. For example, the Battle of Waterloo is not just a physical clash, but an event composed of many singularities, kind of strategic decisions, weather, morale, and so on. Singularities are part of multiplicities, complex fields of potential. They are distributed across a field and define the structure of that field. They are impersonal and non-subjective. They don't belong to anyone or anything until they are actualized. So this kind of Deleuzian topology draws quite heavily on Gilbert's Simondon. So if you wanted to reframe Deleuze, you could say that he's a Simondonian, if you really wanted to be tricky. And Simondon's account of individuation, where the pre-individual field is metastable, charged with tensions and potentials that are not yet resolved into form. Simondon's conceptualization of metastability is a direct influence in Deleuze's work in Difference and Repetition, where it informs the last couple of chapters, and the 10th series on singularities in the logic of sense. So lastly, Deleuze distinguishes between the virtual and the actual. Singularities exist in the virtual. They are real, but not yet actualized. They are points of differentiation that guide how things become actual, how they take form in the world. So a singularity in Deleuze is a number of things: a pre-individual point of potential, a virtual condition for the emergence of actual entities or events, a structuring element in a field of difference, a non-personal, impersonal force that shapes becoming. And the fourth person singular is best understood not as a subject, but as a perspective without a subject from the perspective of singular points. So to illustrate this, I've got two examples. So this is 2 pages from Alan Moore's Watchmen graphic novel, first published by DC Comics across 1986-1987, illustrated by Dave Gibbons, coloured by John Higgins. It's widely regarded as one of the most influential works in the comic book medium, often credited with elevating the genre to literary status. It was named in the top 100 literary text Guardian's list from the mid-2000s, if I remember correctly. So the basic summary is it's set in an alternate 1985 America where superheroes emerged in the 40s and 60s, from the 1940s and 1960s. The Watchmen explores a world teetering on the brink of nuclear war. So the US won the Vietnam War thanks to the intervention of Dr. Manhattan. He was a scientist. They were doing some quantum experiment. His body gets dissolved. He reforges it with a pure force of will, and he becomes this kind of inhuman, superpowered being. Dr. Manhattan, one of the key things about him, and this is what's has been turned into a meme as well online, he experiences time non-linearly. So he experiences every moment of his being at the same time, right? Past, present, and future. And so this series of slides really exploits the kind of comic book form. It's actually quite amazing because he's talking about different moments of his life that are actually co-present, right? It's this kind of superposition of moments that he's experiencing all at once. He still has a sense, a kind of subjective sense of the sequence of events, which is really interesting. But yeah, the thing that overwhelmingly kind of defines him as a character is this kind of cosmic perspective, and it drives a lot of the action around him kind of interacting with others. So the comic panels, they index a kind of multiplicity of events, of a singular pure event, which is his existence. And I would suggest this inculcates a version of the fourth person singular. It's probably it's the closest version to what I imagine the fourth person singular is that I can find in any version of popular culture, right? His kind of Dr. Manhattan's kind of perspective. So have that in mind, someone who experiences all times at once from the perspective of the fourth person singular. So my next example, you can sit back and relax. I'm going to talk through this. So to make the abstract framework of the fourth person singular more accessible, I want to turn to a deceptively simple example, the boiling point of water. At first glance, this appears to be a straightforward physical fact. 100 degrees centigrade at 1 atmosphere of pressure will boil water. But when read through the lens of Deleuze, Simondon, and Whitehead, the boiling point of water becomes a singular multiplicity, a problematic field, and a virtual condition that is actualized in diverse ways across physical, social, cultural, and historical domains. So Simondon, this has got form. Simondon uses several physical and chemical examples of singularities in his work, upon which Deleuze based his understanding of singularity. For example, crystallization as kind of chemical singularities, supercooling and freezing for thermodynamic singularities, and other examples like cyclones and weather systems. So in physical terms, the boiling point of water is a phase transition, the point at which water changes from liquid to gas. But this thermodynamic singularity is actualized differently depending on context. To boil pasta, to brew coffee, to steep tea, to sanitize instruments, to distill spirits. Each of these is an event, an actualization of the boiling point as a virtual condition. The boiling point is not a fixed identity, but a problem space, a site of potential transformations. It is a singular multiplicity, one point, many actualizations. To contemplate the boiling point of water, a singular multiplicity, means to shift towards that cosmic perspective of Dr. Manhattan or the fourth person singular. The boiling point of water is not a fixed datum in a scientific chart. It is a singular multiplicity suspended in a cloud of virtuality, a cosmic node where matter, meaning, and transformation converge. It is a threshold, but one that is endlessly variable, modulated by altitude, pressure, mineral content, vessel shape, cultural ritual, historical moment, and ecological condition. It is not a point in space or time, but a field of potential actualizations, a topology of becoming that stretches across the cosmos. At sea level, it may be 100 degrees centigrade. On a mountain, it shifts. In a pressurized lab, it bends. In a tea ceremony, it is choreographed. In a protest kitchen, it is politicized. In a colonial archive, it is instrumentalized. In climate discourse, it becomes a metaphor, a tipping point, a planetary fever. Each variation is not a deviation from a norm, but an expression of the boiling point's virtual cloud, the infinite differential relations that condition its actualization. This cloud is not chaotic. It is structured by singularities. Each singularity is a threshold, a fold, a point of inflection. So to contemplate the boiling point cosmically is to see it as a diagram of expressive causality. It is quasi-cause, not of heat, but of change. It links disparate assemblages, culinary, medical, industrial, symbolic, without collapsing them into a single logic. This prepares us to think assemblages not as static configurations, but as dynamic compositions of affect, intensity, and singularity. The boiling point, from the perspective of the boiling point itself, is an assemblage in motion, a stratified field of actualizations, each shaped by the virtual cloud that surrounds it. So it is a fourth person singular as assemblage. So in Ian's book, Assemblage Theory and Method, he emphasizes that assemblages are not just collections of things, but dynamic configurations that are stratified, organized according to strata and singularities that condition their formation, transformation, and dissolution. Drawing from Deleuze and Guattari's 1,000 Plateaus, he clarifies that strata are not layers in a geological sense, but regimes of articulation, patterns of consistency that determine what can be said, done, sensed, or thought within a given assemblage. What is relevant for us today is that strata are characterized by their singular points of their composition, distributed conditions that define the problematic field of the assemblage. These singularities are not fixed identities, but thresholds, inflections, and potentials. They are virtual coordinates that structure the assemblage capacity to affect and be affected. In this sense, stratification is the organization of singularities. Each stratum is a field of distributed singular points, and each assemblage is a composition of strata. The fourth person singular is the perspective of the assemblage, not as a subject, but as a topology of singularities, a problem space that precedes and exceeds any particular function of identity. The boiling point of water, rather than treating it as a single event, we can now approach it as a stratified assemblage composed of multiple strata. So from a thermodynamic stratum defined by a singularity of 100 degrees centigrade at 1 atmosphere, but also by the distributed conditions of pressure, altitude, and kind of material composition. from the culinary stratum, defined by singularities such as taste, texture, timing, and cultural technique, steeping versus boiling, for example. From the medical hygienic stratum, defined by thresholds of sterilization, microbial resistance, and institutional protocols. From the industrial stratum, defined by the transformation of water into steam, the regulation of pressure, the engineering of a heat exchange. And from the symbolic stratum, defined by metaphors of crisis, reaching a tipping point, purification or transformation. Each of these strata is composed of singular points, thresholds, inflections, and potentials that define what the boiling point can become in that context. The boiling point assemblage is thus a multiplicity of singularities, and each singular point is a multiplicity in turn. So now we get to the end, towards the end. Minimal Deleuze. So thank you for indulging me in my high theory paper. No, minimal Deleuze. So this is for people who have encountered Deleuze before, one of those 8 strands, and yeah, haven't thought, well, maybe they have, kind of lots of people have, even Alain Badiou in his book, he has a version of this minimal Deleuze. No one really agrees with his interpretation, but he certainly has a version of it. This is how I would characterize the kind of minimal Deleuze. If we're thinking, what is the minimal version of Deleuze that you need to apprehend to gain traction, and then use that to explore as a starting off point the rest of his work. These are the three kind of principles. With what I've been calling this cosmic Deleuze, I've been making a case at the same time for a minimal Deleuze that takes seriously his various comments about trying to think multiplicities, with a focus on his work around the time of difference and repetition and the logic of sense. So across difference and repetition and the logic of sense, Deleuze argues that singularities or singular multiplicities, not identities or substances, are the true conditions of thought and reality. In difference and repetition, ideas are defined as multiplicities structured by differential relations in singular points. These are not representations, but problematic fields that condition actualization. In the logic of sense, singularities are ideal events distributed across a surface of sense, forming a topology of becoming that precedes subjects and objects. And I would argue a kind of minimal Deleuze begins here with a singularity as the ontological and epistemological unit of analysis. Next, we have the problematic field. So Deleuze's metaphysics is not grounded in identity or representation, but in the problematic field, a virtual structure composed of singularities, thresholds, and inflections. The field is impersonal and pre-individual. No one owns the boiling pot of water. It is the fourth person singular, a perspective without subject, a topology of potential. This concept allows us to think from the outside, from the conditions of becoming rather than the products of being. And lastly, perspective without a subject. In the fold, Deleuze deepens his metaphysics by showing how monads express the world from a point of view, but this point of view is itself a folded singularity. The fold is the structure of the fourth person singular. It is how the virtual enters the actual, how the eternal becomes expressive, eternal in Whitehead's sense. So to summarize, to think cosmically is to think from the fourth person singular. It is to inhabit the impersonal field of singularities, to engage with the problematic, to affirm the adventure of becoming. It is to see the boiling point not as a number, but as a metaphysical fold, an affective cloud, an assemblage in motion. And so where I wanted to go with this, and I won't, but I'll just touch on it briefly because I've raced through my presentation, which is great, is to think about kind of causality in this framework. So causality is not a chain of events, but a field of expressive actualization. An event occurs not because of a prior cause, but because of a singular point is resolved in a problematic field. And this is why Deleuze says that ideas are dramas. So to tie it back to the opening quote, they are not static essences, but dynamic distributions of potential actualized through spatio-temporal dynamisms, if I can speak, dynamisms. And so, yeah, to make a case for this minimal Deleuze, I'm imagining a future where people do not encounter Deleuze through the strands of scholarship. Those strands of scholarship are under threat. We can defend them. Everyone's been defending them, which is good. We can try and connect our students with them. But yeah, I think it's a massive challenge for us to think this through. I don't think this will you know, maybe others will pick up this notion of a kind of minimal Deleuze or a minimal theorist to help find those points of traction and connection that future students, future scholars may actually want to engage with. But yeah, I don't think it'll be the last time we think about it in these terms. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Glenn. That has given us all plenty to chew on.
Hi, Glenn.
Hi.
Thanks. Really great to hear this. I think it's really, really important challenges that in terms of how we actually maintain excitement and interest in some of these theories that we want to critique as well as engage with in various ways. I've kind of got a question for you, a bit of a provocation perhaps of, but why? Why should anyone care? Why should we keep doing this? And I guess I'm going to help you answer that from my perspective.
Yep. Good.
If that's okay. And I guess I kind of think about this. I mean, I was just thinking as you were talking that this kind of perspective of the assemblage, not the individual, is kind of a really critical way of thinking in terms of engaging with climate change and thinking through how we deal with the most significant issues of now. And particularly in terms of holding all temporalities together at once, right? The future in the now, in the past in the now, which is what's demanded of us. So I kind of am interested in your thoughts about whether that's a real value proposition for engaging with this. And I will just quickly say that I see that's very much in the Indigenous futurist thinking as well, right? All of those temporalities all at once. So it's not that I think we should be looking at Deleuze alone, but though, it's interesting in that important space as well in terms of these ecological challenges. Anyway, that's my provocation. Who cares? Does it matter in this sense in terms of working on some of those really big issues?
Yep. Yeah, no, definitely. You're not the first person recently to challenge me on the question of who cares about any of this stuff anymore? Like, really, the world's burning. Why should we care? So there's a really interesting thing that happens when you start engaging with kind of Deleuzean scholars, and like they start talking about their kind of biographies a little bit, and like where they've come from, their kind of trajectories, and you realize that there's this weird resonance that has emerged around the kind of anti-fascist, kind of majoritarian way of thinking. So this kind of becoming minor, this notion of becoming minor. A really good example of this is Brian Masumi's reflections. That's part of the 100th year. So it's 2025 is the 100th. No, the 100 years since kind of Deleuze was born. So he was born in 1925. And so one of the university presses, now I can't remember which one it is, they're celebrating this with a series of like posts and reflections from different scholars. And Brian Masumi has an amazing post talking about how he grew up in this pretty conservative space, like that's where he came from. And so he connected with very early kind of environmental thinking and thinkers, and it was through that pathway that he engaged with kind of Deleuze and Guattari's work through college and elsewhere. And it really opened his eyes and it helped him kind of formalize his approach to the world. And I think there's something in that where this kind of thinking helps us to develop ways of being that don't seek to dominate, that aren't about dominating. Yeah, it's that notion of becoming minor. I truly believe it. You talk to other like Deleuzeans, like they have often very similar trajectories where they've grown up in pretty conservative contexts, and then they've changed their thinking. The multiple temporalities, I love this stuff. This is my version of popular culture, to be honest, thinking about multiple temporalities. I love this stuff. Everything All at Once is a great movie. There's been so much there's a shift towards problematizing temporality within popular culture. Think about Doctor Who when that emerged. I'm not sure if that's been written yet, that kind of critical piece around questions of temporality in the kind of popular kind of imaginary. Like I know there's been a lot of stuff on time travel, but it's normally through a modernist lens rather than thinking about it in terms of what's actually happened to time and our kind of perception of it. But yeah, being able to contemplate non-human temporalities, I think is essential, as we work to adjust to the challenges of the present. Yeah. And getting out of the daily rhythms and things, it's hard to do that sometimes in that kind of affective sense. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I don't know if I said I really enjoyed the paper.
And because I'm going to be really annoying and just offer a comment rather than a question. Sorry, just on that, just to add on to Bethany's thing, what you were saying about the impact of different modes of thinking on then action and social change. Christeva actually talks about thinking as revolt. And I actually once took a unit for the group of creative arts practitioners precisely on that idea about how the micro-fascisms inside us need to be challenged. And, the context of a lot of this stuff coming after the Second World War and, the war in Algeria and all that kind of stuff. I think there is a lot of what you were suggesting, like we can look to history and see how that manifests and try to do the same here. That's all.
Thanks, Glen. I really enjoyed that paper. I think it's an honourable project to design this kind of minimal Deleuze that can come out of the academy and be picked up by and run with by people. And as one of those people who did kind of embark on I gave up after about 5 years, but I did embark on a program of self-taught Deleuze reading. Your version of Deleuze seems to resonate very well with that. I guess just one question I have is about the Gen AI process and, its tendency to turn things into bland, majoritarian, even fascistic kind of thinking.
Mhm.
So how do you kind of, I guess two things. Well, how would you do a Deleuzean critique of what Gen AI does with thought?
Mhm.
And then also, how could your minimal Deleuze survive and thrive and prosper as a radical mode of thinking in that environment?
So I don't have any fully formed thoughts around this. I've definitely got 3 half-formed thoughts. There was a fantastic piece, I think it was in the New Yorker, by a Princeton academic talking about teaching creative writing. And no, Princeton academic talking about history. It was history. He was the historian. And he talks about it in a very similar way to the way in which Derrida talked about the archive. And he literally says, Gen AI is a way of kind of animating the archive in ways that we haven't thought about previously. And that kind of resonated with me a little bit, but instead of humans doing it, it's this kind of surface level, because it is surface level, kind of machinic sense is the way I describe it in kind of Deleuzean terms. So it's not sense in the way that we would think about it from like the logic of sense, anyway, the way in which sense emerges as an event. There's something else going on there. There's something else going on there. On the surface of it, it's this kind of machinic sense. And I haven't thought it through too much yet. So Gen AI, as I talk about with my students, because I've actually redesigned 2 of my units to have AI positive assessments in them this semester, it is fantastic at summarizing. If you point it at an actual document and you give it the parameters with keywords to say, I want it summarized like this, to do this, it'll give you back a fantastic response. It's actually genuinely very good at doing that kind of thing. If you try and use it as a shortcut where you don't give it the source documentation and you don't give it the keywords to do its query, it's actually extremely bad. And so I've experimented with like Deleuze's work, seeing if it could come up with a version of this minimal Deleuze, and it can't, right? AI is terrible because Deleuze uses all different languages, all different terminologies throughout each of his books, and you have to have a human being to go through and actually read it all and know that on some level, so like it is actually, it does kind of resonate kind of across the series. So I'm imagining that we will eventually use Gen AI as a kind of wayfinding tool, not to literally generate things. Like I think that's buying into the hype a little bit too much. It'll be to help us with our memories. Like the person who I would want to tell us about Gen AI is actually Stiegler, Bernard Stiegler. I think he would have a fantastic take on it. I don't really know how that's going to play out in kind of totality, but just in terms of its strengths and weaknesses, I can't see it replacing scholarship like this, the thinking that has to go into this sort of thing. But it'll be useful in very particular ways. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, look, thank you very much for your presentation. Is really engaging. Lots of thoughts. 2 things. A simple one about assemblage theory. I come to that from network theory. Any comments in terms of the relation of what you're talking about and network theory? The other thing is perhaps a little bit more complicated, and the idea that is engagement with the fourth person singular a human activity, in the sense that I spend my days in the last month or so driving myself crazy thinking about AGI, thinking about humanity, and so on. And it seems to me I'm on the search for differences and characterizations. And it seems to me from what I've read, which is quite a lot now, that machines are not terribly capable of engaging with the fourth person singular. Any thoughts?
Yes, so to do with network, with network theory, so there's, again, I think there's lots of different versions of network theory depending on your like parent discipline, but the version I'm kind of familiar with was being used in kind of social network analysis for media and comms. And where it's different from assemblages is that the networks are normally kind of spatialized representation of a set of kind of relationships. So here's the relationship and it's spatialized as a network. And when you think about things in terms of assemblages, you're trying to capture the kind of dynamic dimensions of its unfolding. It may exist between different thresholds of kind of composition, but it doesn't have that kind of spatialized logic to it yet. Things may be spatialized within it, like definitely, but yeah, there is this kind of intensive kind of temporal dimension I don't think exists within the network-based approaches to things, in my understanding. Like I could be wrong. Yeah, it does. So there's, I think it does pick up. So, okay, the probabilistic and algorithmic weighting of information that the AI that we use in our, in kind of Copilot and things, it gathers up singular points from the archive, whatever it's been trained on, and then it spits back a version of it. And the version of it doesn't have any connection with like human sense. That's why I was describing it earlier in terms of having that kind of machinic sense. So I've had it described to me as being a kind of overeager child trying to please the user, or as a PhD student on ketamine, there's another description. So very eager to give you the answer that it thinks you want, right? And so it doesn't have those kind of thresholds of sense that we would draw upon as we, grow up and mature to provide answers to things. It only looks at those singular points and then kind of works to represent them back to us. So I don't know, there's something missing there, which is human. I'm not sure if it's what it's drawing upon though. For me, it feels like it's in the interaction with the user. That's the bit where something's missing, and it's a kind of threshold of sense that it seems to ignore. Yeah. Anyway, that's.
Thank you. Irfan.
Hi again. Thank you for that. That was a fantastic paper. I just, in terms of fourth person singularity, as someone who read Watchmen in the late 80s and was fascinated with some of those ideas, I'm doing a PhD. I have a character based on Scheherazade in the Arabian Nights, who reads stories every night to stay alive, who I would propose has a similarity to Dr. Manhattan in that she is doing something similar, and after telling 1,001 stories and then starting again, she becomes a singularity in some ways. The stories then also start clashing, and then there's no sense of time anymore. So in terms of, she's not a contemporary character, but I also think that she's a precursor to something like Dr. Manhattan and some of the ideas that are in Arabian Nights in terms of the palindromic 1001. And and also she is essentially becomes an AI type at some point, if you think about it, because she disseminates so many stories that she can provide anything you like in terms of the respite you need at that time. So that's what's happening in my PhD, in my stories. But I just thought there was a parallel between Dr. Manhattan and Scheherazade in terms of characters you were looking for.
Yeah.
It might be worth thinking about in terms of mathematics, four hairs, labyrinths, and so on and so forth. So, but thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Scheherazade from, what's the actual, it's 1,000, what's it called, Arabian Night? What's it actually called? The story? Oh, the Arabian Nights. Yeah.
Adding to that and to Bess's comment, I was always captivated by Slaughterhouse-5 and the Tralfamadorians, who are in all space and all time. It does fuck him up. Billy Pilgrim can't cope with that, and this guy's always coming to kill him, or he's always back in. So I'm not sure how happy a state it is for humans, but it's intellectually very stimulating. And I guess that takes me to Bess's thing, why? And I love theory, and I love the pointlessness and the meaningfulness of it. But in a world of job-ready graduates, where, as you observed, humanities are pretty much dead, is there a way of building this into, I'm so boring, something applied, right? I'm thinking of how for the last 10, 15 years, governments and major funding bodies around the world have been saying the wicked problems of the world can't be resolved by a single discipline. Maybe they can be resolved by fourth person singular.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's definitely, it invites a different, almost like an applied, non-applied way of thinking. If that so there is a kind of rigorous method behind thinking the complexity of things, where the immediate way of thinking about something may not actually be a solution to a problem in the way that we would recognize it. Like the first step you normally do, right, in any of this kind of work, is to re-problematize stuff, is to think back, is the problem itself kind of characterized in a way which is appropriate for thinking through in different ways. And like that feels like a really good first step for a whole bunch of stuff that's going on at the moment. Yeah, it does feel like it's out on its own. I used to produce little Deleuzians in some of my units. That was that was the way I used to think about it. Definitely comms and media. We used to have a unit on kind of assemblages. I had a unit on assemblages, and my logic there was to get them to think beyond the device, right? Like to think about the context within which the kind of technological, social, cultural kind of context of things. And there were some people who engaged with that. They got it. There were a lot of people who did not like it. That was fair enough. But some students liked it. Yeah, and they kind of ran with it, which was cool. But we don't have those units, even that sort of unit anymore. So yeah, it's I'm not sure how it's going to survive, to be honest. Like I don't see beyond the generations that are kind of present in this room. Like I don't see where it's going to go. It's just, yeah, it's going to be really interesting in the future.
Glen, I want to bounce back with the fourth person singular. It was making me think of Kant and Kant's idea of intellectual intuition. And I'm thinking of the critique of the power of judgment, where Kant says that angels can't produce art and they can't enjoy art because they're in Dr. Manhattan's, situation, where they don't have a problem categorizing new phenomena because they already grasp it. In a way, they already know it all. And that means they're incapable of aesthetic experience. I don't think that's a critique of what you're saying. It's more, I just want to put that out there to see where you would position the work of the creative artist in relation to this.
Okay. So from a Kantian perspective, so Deleuze's critique of Kant was about ideas not having a kind of regular basis. He basically argued that they have this kind of this problematic basis. That's what in the kind of difference and repetition, that's the main thrust of his argument. And there, going back to Kant, I actually really like Kant, and I like the third critique, the kind of critique of the power of judgment, because that's where he talks about enthusiasm. So for Kant, enthusiasm is a moment where we stretch the powers of imagination, is the way he talks about it. And for me, that feels like what we're doing when we're doing the creative work of thinking. And so enthusiasm isn't the hot, breathless, I'm excited because I'm about to go see, K-pop Demon Hunters at the sing-along at the cinema on the weekend, like my daughter was. That's her version of enthusiasm. For Kant, enthusiasm is this cold, kind of enduring thing where you labor and you keep on laboring over something. Like it's like grit. It's a really awkward kind of feeling where you don't give up thinking something, right? That's you really pushing your mind to expand or do something, change, mutate, to be able to contemplate something. And so I don't know, for me, that feels like, from, again, engaging with some of the stuff around kind of aesthetics and Deleuze, that's where I see a lot of the overlap with kind of creative practice. It's when you can induce that through kind of sensible means, through artworks, through moments of encounter where you invite people to have that kind of response through artwork, through creative practice. So I don't know about the actual artist, but I'm more thinking about it in terms of the engagement with art. Yeah. I don't know if that responds to what you're saying, but it's kind of, I do like the third critique. I like scanned the other ones as like, yeah, whatever, can't, who cares? And then I read the third, it started talking about enthusiasm. I was like, yes, this is great. So
Well, the rest was run up.
yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. I really enjoyed the whole presentation. I, like yourself, have gone on a self-discovery journey with Deleuze in my back pocket for 30 years. I'm struggling with this idea of perspective. And I'm wondering if you can actually have a perspective without first constructing a subject. It's kind of in a way like Schrodinger's gaze. Do you know what I mean? Like as soon as we sort of construct something to examine or explain this sort of purely virtual positioning or moment of perception, you necessitate, like as soon as I have an orientation, immediately I've constructed a series of relationships. I've constructed the kitchen and the water in order to have that. And I guess, I'm wondering when I kind of think back to it is which is kind of exciting in a way because it's so underdeveloped. But, are we really talking about a kind of active schizoanalysis in terms of a model for deconstructing from this moment, this kind of moment of perception without subject?
That's really, yeah. So he does, so where in kind of Deleuze's work where he expands on this notion of a perspective without a subject is really in The Fold, where he engages with Leibniz, and The Fold is a version of this, right? It's this kind of ideal event that that he uses as a way to think through, the concept of event. I'm trying to think through, I won't talk about that too much. There's an entire chapter on it on the concept of the event where he also engages with Whitehead and Whitehead's kind of process philosophy. And it's really interesting because I think Whitehead would agree with you that it's impossible to have any kind of perspective without some kind of coming together of like different relations. And so for Whitehead, an event is when prehensions prehend each other. It's the way he talks about it. That's in kind of process and reality. And Deleuze engages with that notion to think through how Leibniz talks about the fold as a way to imagine kind of reality from that perspective. So there's a fold of reality. That's one approach. The other approach is in a very brief essay from Deleuze called Pure Immanence, a Life. And it's about the concept of life, but also death, where death is the pure event for Deleuze. It's something that we all know, but as soon as it's kind of actualized, it ceases to be because the thing that has, or the death itself kind of doesn't exist anymore in the way that we think about life and death. And so I've thought about that a lot in terms of aging. So I don't know who has a pet here. Who has pets? Who has pet? Yep, I have a beautiful dog, Rosie. And now when I play with Rosie, what I can't shake, and this is probably a bit grim, is the fact that my lifespan is like 3 or 4 times my dog's lifespan. And so every time I play with her, it's like laced with this idea of my lifespan kind of exceeding hers. And so within this kind of cloud of virtualities around my kind of interaction with my dog, it's this idea that her death is present. This kind of event of her death, it's making me sad, is actually going to go, it means that when I play with her and she's having a good time and having fun, I'm glad that she actually gets to kind of experience life like that. Possibly even more grim is that when I talk to older family members, I have the same thought. This could be the last conversation. When I talk to my daughter, I'm hoping her lifespan will kind of radically exceed mine. And so I think through how you don't need like a point, which is a kind of perspective on the fourth person singular. It's this cloud of virtualities that kind of inheres and subsists around every action, right? So yeah, I don't know. That's a very quick response to a very complex question.
Speaking to the kind of shifting intensities within the event in itself, that like the dog's got maybe a third of your time, but its time, the intensities of its time might be.
Nah, man, my dog sleeps for 90% of the day.
But intensely sleeping, intensely, deeply sleeping in a way you will never understand.
Yeah. No, she's very excited to see me. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. That was amazing. Speaking as an absolute Deleuzian novice, I just wanted to ask what happened to the rhizome? Because as a way of engaging with Deleuze, I mean, in the first I heard of Deleuze was in my Master of Fine Arts, speaking of visual artists, thanks to Denise, who just left the room. Yeah, so that to me is just such a visual, a really strong visual way of engaging, as was the boiling pot.
Mhm.
I mean, as soon as I saw that, I just switched on.
Mhm.
So yeah, and also the idea of the rhizome, that really got me straight away.
That's good. That's good to know. That's really interesting. So yeah, I don't think that these things are kind of necessarily kind of exclusive, right? Like there's lots of ways to approach it. Absolutely. And if something resonates with you to start that journey, that's great. That's fantastic. That's great. The thing about the rhizome is that people, I've noticed, will engage with the concept of the rhizome, and then that's not like, and then that's basically it. Like, if you know what I mean? And it's, yeah. And so, yeah. And so, and then, you know, so to understand the rhizome, which is a chapter in 1,000 Plateaus, to understand the kind of arborescent, they're not really metaphors because they don't really do metaphors, like, but they are kind of metaphorical representations of ways of talking about thinking from kind of difference and repetition, right? And so once you have a sense of that, then you can go back and read difference and repetition, and you can hold the imagery of the rhizome and the arborescent in the back of your mind, and it gives you a way of encountering this super dense, like just theory writing that they do, these dead French guys. It's amazing, right? And like it's what's funny about AI and using Copilot. I was reading difference and repetition, and I was like, man, this could have been written by AI. That's the, like, no, not the ideas, but the actual text itself is like so just, yes, sometimes. And I like having really grounded like ways of imagining this stuff in the back of my mind as I'm reading things. So I did my PhD on car culture, right? So like literally I was reading Kant, thinking about car enthusiasts. So that's kind of how I work. So if you've got the concept of the rhizome, that's fantastic. I'll just suggest that, yeah, it's the start of a journey with this stuff. Yeah.
Okay, we will call things a day there. And thank you, and thanks again to Glen.